offshore bass fishing. A strategy that many anglers struggle to learn but truly is necessary if you want to catch bass no matter where you live and fish. From Idaho to Alabama, Connecticut to California, fish eventually move off the docks, the shallow grass, the shallow sticks to live their lives offshore. So in today's video, I'm going to give you the most information possible, the best tips I got for finding and catching bass off the bank, starting first with an overview of fish finders and mapping, then going into the three main locations bass may live offshore: grass, rocks, and wood. My name is Tyler, and this may be the most detailed instructional video on offshore fishing on the entire internet, so strap in, let's talk about it. Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all. I can't believe what I just caught. Yes! So first, let's answer the question of the day. Why do bass go offshore at all? If they've got so many places to live shallow like docks and lily pads and grass and stumps, why the heck would they ever leave to go somewhere else deeper? The main reason for that is because that is where the entire ecosystem moves when water temperatures get too drastic, either too hot or too cold. And when the entire forage base of a bass moves deep, the bluegills, the crawfish, the shad, the baitfish, when those things are no longer on the bank, or at least the majority of them, the majority of the bass are not going to be there either. They're going to be where the food is. And so if you find yourself in a situation, usually the summer or the winter, where you're going down the bank fishing stuff that you normally catch fish on and you just can't get a bite, it's probably because the fish aren't even there. But I love fishing the bank. I love throwing a frog, and I love skipping docks, and I like flipping wood. Man, deep scares me. I mean, like, how deep should I go? Like, what, is it 50 feet? Is it 100 feet? Bottom of the Mariana Trench. Now that right there, while overly dramatized, is actually a legitimate concern a lot of anglers have. How deep should I be fishing? Because looking offshore, it can be incredibly daunting. So how deep is offshore? To me, offshore fishing is anything from 10 feet to 30 feet, with my best, most consistent good bites coming in structure and cover that's in 10 to 20 feet. So now that you look at 10 to 20 feet, it's not really that daunting. So now that we've got that covered, let's talk about the actual technology and gear necessary in order to find and catch offshore bass. The first item being two fish finders that are connected via Ethernet or Wi-Fi. That way you can share waypoints from one graph to the other. The second item you need to be more efficient is going to be a marker buoy, especially if you don't have forward-facing sonar like LiveScope, Humminbird, Mega Live, and Lowrance Active Target. These types of sonars have radically changed the way that anglers can fish offshore, and if you can save up enough money for your watercraft, whether it's a John boat, kayak, or a big bass boat, to have forward-facing sonar, it basically eliminates the need for this. If you're confused about how all this works, don't worry, we're going to talk about it. So hopping into your fish finder, your graph here, let's talk about mapping, which is the first step to finding and catching offshore bass. The type of map that fishermen use is called a topographic map, and what this shows is the contours of what is down there. Imagine it's just like a mountain range that you see on a topographic map on land. It is just like that, but underneath the water. I can't even think of a single lake out there that is just a standalone bowl like you find in your kitchen. Almost every lake has differences in the contours down there. It's got points, it's got humps. Let's talk about what all those terms mean and what to look for to find them. So the main theme when it comes to reading your topographic map is going to be looking for differentiation in contour line pattern. And this could honestly manifest itself in tons of different ways here on your graph. And so let's talk about some of the most common ones that you could find bass on offshore. Starting with number one, points. As seen here on the screen, the contour lines generally follow the direction of the above water bank line. So if you see a point on land, more than likely that point is going to continue to extend at the same slope or similar slopes out into the water for a good ways. Sometimes though, the bank may look totally flat and you might not expect there to be a point there, but there is. And topographic mapping is the only way to see that. In my experience, there is no better place to find bass offshore than on a point, and points are great places to find structure, which is oftentimes what keeps the bass on that point. So brush piles, a rock vein, we're gonna talk about all those in the next videos in this series. The next feature, and one of my favorites to fish for offshore bass, is going to be a hump. On your topographic map, this looks like contour lines that form some kind of circular shape. almost like the rings on a tree. If the number on the center of that circular area right in the middle is smaller than the numbers on the outside of that circle, that means it is a hump. Basically, just imagine a hump is a hill covered by water. Now, the flip side of a hump is called a dip or a depression. That is where the middle number on the contour map is smaller as the rings expand than the number on the outside, just like a pothole on the street that is covered by water. The next term is called a channel. Now, a channel is kind of defined differently depending on what type of body of water you are on, natural, man-made, big reservoir, small reservoir, but every lake out there has some kind of channel. Most lakes have old creeks that were there before the lake was even flooded or created, and so those creeks are still used by bass as really deep highways and pathways to get from one area of the lake to another. So it could be a super deep creek channel in the middle of a lake in like 70 feet of water, or it could be a very small creek that back in the day ran into the main river channel out there in the middle of what is now the lake. And so that tiny creek channel is used by bass, especially when they are in the backs of those pockets. Channels are a great place to find fish. The next two terms, and one especially that is thrown around a ton in tournament fishing, is a ledge or a break. I'm sure you've watched professional fishing coverage from Pickwick or Gunnersville or Kentucky Lake, and you've heard of guys talk about cranking their 6XD on that ledge, and you're thinking, I live in Nebraska. What the heck's a ledge? All a ledge really is a steep drop off from shallow to deep water that fish will oftentimes use, especially if current is flowing by, to sit either on top or on the bottom and ambush bait fish that are also in those areas. Like I said, bait fish, crawfish, bluegill, they're gonna move from the shallows to the depths, especially in the summertime, and ledge fishing is an awesome way to catch fish. And it is not just a thing you can do on the pro circuit. You can fish ledges at home, but they're probably not gonna be called ledges. They're gonna be called breaks. That term in my mind is almost interchangeable, but it really is defined on the map by a sharp collection of contour lines. What that means is when you see contour lines that are really close together, the depth is changing relatively fast. So you could have a fast sloping break on a bluff wall close to the bank. You could have one way offshore on the creek channel. There can be ledges and breaks all over the lake, but those are great places to use your fish finders to scan and find offshore bass. Now, the biggest thing to keep in mind when it comes to these offshore locations is that the definition of them is incredibly relative to the lake that you are on. So just because a pro fisherman is talking about fishing a hump on this lake doesn't mean it's gonna set up and look the exact same on the home lake you have. So don't get discouraged when you watch pro fishermen or YouTubers catching tons of fish talking about fishing humps and fishing drop-offs, fishing points, and you're thinking, Tyler, I can't even find the same looking stuff they're fishing. It's probably because your lake is a little bit different. So put in the time, learn your topographic maps, and I promise you, it is worth every second to become better at reading your maps. So that has been a lot of information so far. I hope you're not overwhelmed. We got a ton more to come. I say it's time we move on to talking about the different types of sonar that you use with your fish finder to find those pesky offshore bass. So when talking about sonar, let's go in order of importance, starting with number one, side scan. If you're gonna find bass offshore, it's incredibly helpful to have what you see on the screen right here, side imaging. Now you may be looking at this and say to me, Tyler, what the heck is that? How do I read what I'm seeing? And I empathize with you. It is definitely not easy to understand what you're looking at right away. What side imaging is showing is what is on the left and the right side of your boat as the transducer goes and you move. So we are moving forward, the bottom of the lake, and whatever is down there that is most recently scanned by my transducer on the back of the boat shows up here on the top of the screen. And then the history is what's here on the bottom. So everything we marked down here on the bottom of the screen was probably marked, I don't know, 15 to 20 seconds ago, which by now is 30 feet behind us. And to help you understand it even better, here's the folded paper model. The folded paper model shows you what side scan looks like if you were to take the left and right sides and kind of squish them up into the middle, with the water column being that vertical fold you see there. Every side scan transducer shoots down and side at once. So what you're seeing here is the boat in the middle where this white line is, and the water column all the way out to, you guessed it, 15.4 feet, as you can tell based on the numbers here on the bottom x-axis. So everything you see on the left side of my screen is exactly what the transducer is graphing down there on the left side of the boat, and everything on the right side is exactly the same on the right side of the boat. Now, just like if you were to shine a flashlight at an object, the light does not reach the back side of that object. That is exactly what's happening here with a sonar transmission. My transducer is shooting sonar left and right, and so it is hitting things like trees, brush piles, rocks, and causing a shadow. That's what you're gonna see on side scan. You may see an object and then a long black shadow beyond it. That is because the transducer cannot read what's behind it. So the longer the shadow, the taller the object is. Just like if the sun is going down, the lower the sun gets to the horizon, the longer your shadow gets because you are taller as compared to where the light is coming from. That is exactly how side scan works. So the next type of sonar to use for offshore fishing is called down scan, and a ton of different units have this type of sonar. Now, what this is showing here is exactly what's underneath the boat. So side scan actually kind of had a version of down scan there in the middle. It was just kind of cut in half and folded over. Down scan here shows you what's happening directly underneath the boat with the current data that you just are marking on the right side of the screen here, with of course the depth markers, 17.2 feet. You see it reflected here by how low the bottom is on the screen. And everything that we have graphed is going to be history on the left side as the screen scrolls. Down scan is great to use when you find a piece of structure or some fish on side scan. Mark a waypoint, as we'll talk about, spin back around and graph directly over them to see exactly what you just marked. That's what down scan is really useful for. Do I use it a whole lot? I really don't, and I'll explain why later. The third sonar we're going to talk about is just traditional 2D old-fashioned sonar, what you see right here. This type of sonar right here reads the exact same way as down scan that we just showed you guys, but in my opinion, it really shows too many things to look like fish. I can guarantee you where we are idling right now, this is not all fish. Not every little mark and arch you see here is a fish, and if they are, these are not bass. When I first got a bass boat, the only sonar I had on my old Lowrance, not even touchscreen unit, was just traditional sonar. And I thought everything was a fish. So I was always stopping, putting my trolling motor down, casting at stuff that nowadays I know is just random stuff in the water. I mean, look at these examples. Brush piles look like fish. Grass looks like fish. Heck, even random sticks look like fish sometimes. I mean, check out the differences between the side scan and down scan images of these exact same things. So do I really use 2D sonar? There are select circumstances, just like with down scan, that I will use it, but for the most part, my graphing when it comes to offshore bass fishing consists of side scan, mapping, and if you have it, forward-facing sonar. Forward-facing sonar has completely changed the way that anglers see what is down there, and oftentimes eliminates the need for a marker buoy, and sometimes even eliminates the need for a waypoint. You can use your mapping, your side scan, down scan to find an area, drop the trolling motor, and in seconds see exactly what you marked on your fish finders with this forward-facing sonar. I mean, I think it's an incredibly helpful tool, and you'll see it tons in the next few videos in this series. I understand this is a very expensive technology, but if you can't afford it, or if you can save up, even if it's for a year or two, to purchase a live scope unit, I'm telling you, it is incredibly helpful to make you a better offshore bass angler. So if these are the types of sonar that I use, and you've selected an area on your map that you want to check out, you think, you know, this looks good, there could be a bass there, I say it's time we crank the engine up and get to idling. So we have found ourselves a main lake point, a great place to search for structure and for fish. Now, two little setting things that I do first. On my map here, you can tell that I have colors on my map. Basically, every fish finder at this point has an option for depth shading. So every 5 feet, I have the depth on the map being displayed as a different color. So you see here, green is 15 to 20, yellow is 10 to 15, orange is 5 to 10, and red is 0 to 5. So if I find that the fish are sitting on brush piles or rocks in 15 to 20, I'm only gonna focus on running my boat, on idling in those green areas, or maybe the green and white or green and yellow, but I wanna stay around the areas where the fish are, so using depth shading helps a ton. Now, heading back to my favorite panel we have here, two things on the screen. I have map on the bottom and side scan on the top. Here with side scan, in terms of settings, I kind of keep it straight from the box. I don't do a whole lot of changes to it. If I'm fishing around muddy bottoms like I am in this lake, mud, sand, silt, I will increase the sensitivity to find more of those sticks, those rocks, those hard areas that fish like to sit on. As I said, we're gonna cover all of these structure in detail in 3 more videos in this series. So Muddy bottoms, I increase the sharpness and contrast, and in rock bottoms, everything is hard. I can kind of decrease that a little bit. But for the most part, I keep my settings relatively straight out of the box. Now, one thing I do adjust as I'm going around this point here is how far the sonar can shoot on either side of the boat. It can go as long as 200 feet on either side of the boat, and you lose a whole lot of detail that way. So if you're just trying to find brush piles or rocks and you don't really care much about details or actually seeing fish, I would mark anywhere from 100 to 150 feet. But if you're really trying to look at detail and look at brush piles and rocks and see, are there any fish sitting on what I'm graphing, I would zoom all the way into 50, 40, 30 feet. It may require you to make more passes down the point, around the bend, over the hump, but you're gonna have a whole lot more detail as you see right here. So I'm gonna zoom out to, I don't know, I like the 60 to 70 feet mark when I'm looking for fish and structure and don't need a whole lot of contrast, but also don't need all this distance. So eventually when idling, you're gonna find something that looks good. So I'll kind of put the engine back in neutral here, and I've already seen two things on the screen while going over this main lake point that I actually like. The first of which being, I'm gonna kind of zoom back right here, this. This right here is either a tree or a brush pile. We actually went basically directly over it because you can see it is right on the edge of where that line is. That's the bottom, directly underneath the boat, but it's just on the left side of the boat because it's displaying on the left side of my screen. So this here is a tree. There might be a fish or two in there, and then you can see the shadow that is cast right there because of course the transducer is hitting it, sending the signal this way and causing that shadow. So that's one thing that I might want to put a waypoint on. The second thing, as I zoom farther towards where we recently marked, is this area over here. There is a few fish kind of scattered around this, just kind of looks like a do-nothing area with a few what looks like stumps or trees in that area as well. That might be something to check. Like I said earlier in this video, offshore fishing and the structure you find is incredibly relative based on where you live. So you might not find anything that looks remotely similar to what I'm gonna be fishing and showing in this video or any of the 3 next videos, but I hope that this stuff is helping you kind of understand how to use your graphs and what to look for. So we're gonna go like this. I'm gonna put my finger right on this brush pile right there, right on the base, press my waypoint. I'm gonna save it as a tree. If I really thought these fish were bass, I would mark a waypoint, but I don't think they are. I think they are just trash fish like carp or gar. So we're gonna move along. Now, as we idle over this next point here, I'm really looking for a brush pile on side scan because I want to show you guys kind of the full strategy when it comes to marking a spot and then fishing it. A lot of graphing for offshore stuff is really just a waste of time. I mean, you're gonna graph over a whole lot of worthless things. Like right there, there's a stump, but it's really small, really not worth fishing. Aha! That might be something out there. I see something on this side of the screen, but again, it's small enough that I don't really care for it. Saw this thing right there. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a harder white return. When sonar hits something that is a hard structure, whether it's wood, rocks, even the roots of grass and lily pads, it shows up as a hard white. And if it is a soft return, it's a darker return. So I see some white dots around a darker return area. That could be either fish or some wood. So I'm gonna mark a waypoint right there. I'll mark it as fish. And now if I look at my map right here, you can see the waypoint is right here. So because I'm unsure of what that even was, I'm gonna spin around and make sure that my boat runs right over that waypoint. 0141 with a fish on it. I wanna know exactly what I was looking at. My boat is over it right now, and I really don't see much. So it's probably just some small fish. And like I said, that's a lot of what graphing is you mark a waypoint, you go back over it, and you're like, there's not a whole lot there. Now, it's possible that what I marked right here was a few fish, but again, there's so much stuff in the water, so much bait fish, so much trash fish in this lake that it's not really worth spending my time. So I'm gonna go back to where that brush pile was and go over it with down scan to see what it looks like on there. That is definitely a good looking tree. Is it worth stopping on? Not quite sure, but I do see something out here that looks a lot like fish that's worth stopping on. So we're gonna do the process all over again. I'm gonna scan right here, new waypoint, and then spin around. And once again, I'm not really seeing anything that I like. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete these waypoints that I've made, find a new point, and hopefully find something worth showing you guys in fishing. All right, like right there, brush pile, drop. So I just dropped the marker buoy. It's now flipping, that weight's going all the way to the bottom, and I marked it a few feet pass. As a matter of fact, there's even some brush piles now that I'm marking underneath. You'll see on down scan here, underneath us right there, some brush and sticks. And so I'm gonna spin around and make some casts at that brush pile, at the buoy, which is probably right there, which means I'll cast to the left of the buoy to get what was behind the buoy, and then to the right of the buoy to get what was right there. So let's spin around and try to catch a fish. So now we have dropped our marker buoy over there, and of course if we didn't have forward-facing sonar, if we just had traditional sonar, that would tell us exactly where to cast, at least give us a good idea of where to cast around. But because I have forward-facing sonar, let me show you guys exactly what I'm looking at here. As we get the camera closer, and I point the transducer in that area, right there, 75 feet, almost to the right side of the screen, you see, and right there at the end, right there, look at that, 80 feet. That is a nice pile of brush. I see fish hanging around there. Are they bass? Not exactly sure. That's why I'm gonna make a cast. Again, right to my marker buoy, because if I didn't have forward-facing sonar, that's exactly what I'd need to be targeting. But because I have it, I can just check out live scope. And as you can see, I am definitely not on the bank. The point is up there. I'm fishing a brushy area that is off of that point as it extends down, as you can see on the topographic map. And I have found some fish. Who knows if they're bass, but some fish and some structure off of that. It might seem daunting at the start when you talk about offshore fishing. I don't even know what I'm looking for out here, but as soon as you understand your electronics, you can feel a lot more confident with pinpointing areas that are off of the bank. So in order to find where grass grows offshore, you've got to know where grass grows in general, and it grows in 3 main places, starting with on the bank behind me. On bodies of water that have aquatic vegetation, or grass, as I'm gonna call it the entirety of this video, most of the grass is going to be along the bank. So I'm talking in the pockets, on the main lake, anywhere you have a bank line, that is where the majority of your grass is going to be. And to find aquatic vegetation, you don't even need a fish finder. You just look with your eyes, because oftentimes the grass is going to be emergent, which means some of it is coming out of the water or laying on top. That, though, is not the offshore grass, the offshore fishing we're talking about. That is onshore grass. Now, the second category that starts to verge into the offshore category is the offshore grass, but it's connected, or is close enough to be connected to the bank grass. So the easiest way to find this type of grass is to find shallow grass and then follow the water deeper, 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 deeper until you get to that 5 to 12 or 15 feet of water. That's gonna be your offshore grass that's connected to the bank. It could be connected to a point, it could be connected to a peninsula, really anything sticking out into the water can lead to offshore grass that is connected to the bank. And the third category of grass, and this is again the most offshore, is going to be offshore but disconnected from the bank. So this is not close to any point, it's not close to any grass edge, grass line, docks, pocket, whatever. It's out in the middle of your body of water, usually on humps or just any kind of underwater structure that is off the bank. And really the only way to find this type of grass offshore, disconnected, is going to be by using your maps and your fish finders, which we're going to talk about. But just because this grass is disconnected from the bank doesn't mean that it's going to be in any deeper of water. So let's talk about depth when it comes to offshore grass fishing. Most offshore grass fishing takes place from 5 to 10 feet of water. I know, pretty shallow compared to most offshore fishing, but grass is a little bit different. Now, aquatic vegetation can grow a lot deeper. I know of lakes that hydrilla grows in 25 plus feet of water, but that's not the majority of lakes, and that's definitely not the majority of offshore grass fishing situations. So we're gonna talk about the majority in this video. Now, where the heck do you start? If you're looking at a topographic map like this one right here, how do you know where to start to look for offshore grass? And besides following the grass out from the bank, how do we find that offshore grass? Let's talk about my 3 main places I look on the map before I turn the big engine on and start idling, looking around. My number 1 place to look for offshore grass really stays consistent with all of my offshore fishing tips, and that is to look for points. So as we scroll around the map right here, I'm gonna look at 2 main points here on the lake in Minnesota that I'm at. This here is a point. See, it says pier or jetty. That's a point, and then this right here is a point as well. Usually though, you can follow a point from where it is on land out into the water a good distance, and you'll be able to find offshore grass, at least until that grass stops growing. Here's another fantastic example of what a offshore grass point probably looks like. Again, I haven't graphed this yet, but this is what it looks like coming off the main point, and then look, extending out into the water all the way out to 10 feet, 15, and then the point kind of dissipates. That is a great example of a land point. But an underwater point that you can't quite see is one just around here. Now, it is a lot shallower. I wouldn't necessarily call this an offshore point, but you can tell right here, there's actually a dip in the bank line right there, but the point actually extends underwater. And if we zoom over here, this one here is kind of a land point, but it extends much farther into the water, under that water that your eyes can't see, but the map can. And right over here, that's an underwater point. Where the bank comes in, a point actually comes out. So there's a lot more points, especially when it comes to grass, than you're probably aware of on your bodies of water. The next place to locate offshore grass is going to be an edge. Now, an edge is an incredibly versatile and far-reaching term because there are grass edges, or known as grass lines, on almost every, I wouldn't even say every body of water. If it's got grass, you've got a stinking grass edge. So if I zoom out here, I know here in Minnesota, all these lakes have grass. And so there's gonna be a grass edge as I follow this bank. And however deep the grass grows, maybe it grows out to 15, maybe it only grows out to 13 right here. And so as long as you've got grass, there's going to be an edge. Fish love to live on edges. I don't know the science behind it, just trust me. I would rather fish 9 out of 10 times on the edge of the grass than in the open water deeper than the grass, or shallower water where the grass is even thicker. Maybe 99% of the time, I'd rather be fishing the edge. Now, grass edges on your sonar are almost never going to be distinct edges where it goes from grass to edge to no grass. Oftentimes, it just starts to thin out. It scatters. It goes from a lot of grass to a little bit less grass. You just want to find whatever the edge is of the grass in your body of water. And really what offshore grass is all about is finding irregularities. Keep that term in your head throughout the rest of this video, because just like bass fishing in general, bass love to sit on things that are different. They love differences, irregularities in the bottom composition. And so if you can find offshore grass and a little patch, a little section that is irregular, looks different, that's most likely where your fish are going to be. So now that we know where to start graphing, let's turn the big engine on, start looking out there for this deep grass. So just like every other type of offshore fishing, I am running mapping on the top of my screen and side scan on the bottom. I prefer not to use down scan or traditional 2D sonar a whole lot. I'll explain one situation here in a second in which I do use those, but most of the time, this is the layout I have. Now, if you've got 2 graphs at the dash here, that's even better. You can have side scan on one, mapping on the other, and maybe even mapping and down scan. But I like to have, as you can see, I get a good clear image from just side scan and mapping. And the main reason for why I don't run down scan or traditional is because you're not gonna see many of the fish that you graph on side scan and grass. You're mostly looking, like I said, for irregularities. That way you can fish those areas to find out if the fish are in there. So this is my general mapping setup for grass. Now, down scan and traditional sonar can be used to help you decide if the area you're fishing has good, healthy grass, or how thick or skinny or stringy that grass is. So here's an image of what grass looks like on down scan, and here's an image of traditional 2D sonar. So I do switch to those occasionally to see what kind of grass I'm dealing with and if it's really thick or really stringy, but most of the time this is my setup. Now, what you see on the screen here is what grass looks like on side scan, with of course a little bit of that grass in the water column right underneath the boat. I'm gonna scroll backwards here and take a screenshot so you guys can see that. But this right here is what grass looks like on side scan. I kind of describe it as like a cloud per se. So you look left and right. Here on the left side, upper left side, you'll be able to tell this is where a grass edge is because you see an actual shadow. Really, you just want to look for good cloudy looking areas that kind of appear to have a stringy look to them. Now, since I'm graphing relatively shallow, like I said, offshore grass fishing is really not that deep of water. I'm going to do 2 things to my graph. First, I'm going to change my frequency that I have on my Garmin here from kind of like the 1000 degree hertz range all the way down to, I think it's 455 kilohertz. And the reason for that is because I've noticed that when you actually drop in the quality, it does hinder your distance, but it gives you better clarity at shorter distances. And that's perfectly okay, because when you're grass fishing, you can't even shoot that far out anyways because you're pretty dang shallow. And so 80 or 100 feet on either side of the boat isn't gonna do you any good because you'll have no clarity past 40. And so I like to have my distance on my side scan usually around 40 to 50 feet. That of course does cause you to have to graph back and forth down your spots a little bit more, but I think that is the best best distance and kilohertz range for shallow grass fishing. I keep the contrast maybe a little bit lower than I do on rocky or more sandy bottom type places. Again, I don't want to blow the screen out, especially when I'm on a grass flat like this with tons of grass. I don't want the whole thing to be a white return. I want to find the best good isolated clumps of grass. And as you can tell right here, we just went over some grass in 2 little holes right there. Again, irregularities, gotta look for them. And again, are you going to see bass on your graph on side scan? Usually no. Now you can find indicators that bass are there. So irregularities, and around those irregularities, you're gonna see probably a few screenshots in this video of some bluegill on side scan. Individual bluegill beds and big old schools of bluegill. You can find bait fish in and around offshore grass. Those are great indicators that bass are nearby. Now you may also find some bass on a hard spot, an opening near that grass, but most of the time, I'd say 90 to 95% of the time, you're not actually targeting individual fish or even small groups of fish on your side scan with offshore grass. You're just looking for fishy areas. So you're gonna hop on the front deck once you mark a few waypoints and actually fish around that area to find where those fish were. That is good looking stuff right there. So as you can see here on the map, we are in about 10 to 13 feet of water. It's actually a point that kind of comes out like this. And as you can see right here, we have a ton of grass on both sides, lots of patches left and right. But I'm gonna get on just side view here so y'all can see what we're dealing with. This is some very good inconsistent stuff. Again, I can't stress this enough. When you're grass fishing offshore, you want to look for and mark waypoints around inconsistencies. And so as you can tell from all of this right here, there is tons of stuff that is just lots of grass. You might find stuff that looks like this on any of the offshore structures that I talked about, the points, the humps, the dips, the channels. And so I'm gonna make a few points here to show you guys what exactly I'm talking about. As you can tell here, we had 0 grass. And as we started to drive over that point, we started to see some really good inconsistencies with some big holes and hard bottom in between those holes, which is just juicy stuff. Then we found ourselves entering into a very thick portion of the grass. This is probably not a place that I want to mark. And then coming off of that section, we got into some really good stuff that I'm actually going to mark some waypoints on. So I'm going to mark a waypoint right here on this edge because I love that I see some bluegills right here. And I'm also going to mark one right over here because I love that I'm seeing a nice defined edge with a hard spot with I think some bluegills in that area too, which means there's probably bass around. I'm also probably gonna mark one all the way over here on this far right side because I think this looks like a really good point of grass to hit. And now we have left that flat area. We are in 20 feet of water, which means there's no offshore grass right here. So I say we circle around, mark a few more waypoints, and catch some fish. I'm gonna say it again, and I'm gonna keep stinking stressing it. You want to look for inconsistencies in the grass. That's where the fish are gonna be. No matter if you're fishing an offshore hump or a grass line, if you have a choice to fish a straight grass line or a little indentation or a little point in that grass line, that's where I spend the majority of my time. Here's an awesome example of that in practice. My good friend Tyler Woolcutt down in Florida is the angler you see on your screen. Now in this Bassmaster video, he shows what a good, inconsistent, shallow grass area looks like on a grass flat down in Florida. This kind of stuff is exactly what you're looking for and what you should be dropping waypoints on if you're offshore grass fishing. So once you've graphed around enough areas, marked enough waypoints, it is time to spin the boat back around and fish those areas, because trust me, the fish are most likely there even if you can't see them on the graph. Now I haven't talked about baits, so let's talk about which baits and lures are best for offshore grass fishing. Now, if you don't know where the fish are exactly in the grassy area you just graphed, you're gonna wanna start with some kind of moving bait like these right here, reaction baits. My two favorite for offshore fishing are the lipless crankbait and the vibrating jig. Now, the reason why, if you're unsure where the fish are, you start with a moving bait is because those fish can hide super easily. They can nestle themselves deep in that grass, and just a few casts over that grassy area with a slower moving lure like a worm, you can easily miss where those fish are and maybe think there's no fish here. Well, guess what? You didn't make enough casts and you weren't efficient enough. So in order to cover more water and maybe find where an active school of fish are, to then slow down and throw a different lure to catch more fish, you gotta start with a moving bait. I love lipless crankbaits in the pre-spawn in the fall, and when it comes to like spawn, post-spawn summer, it's really hard to beat a vibrating jig. As always, I will have all this stuff linked in the video description for y'all to check out. I love the new Mach bait Slackjaw and the old trusty Thunder Cricket. Now, I'm sure a few of you in your heads right now are curious as to why I'm recommending a treble hooked lure if you're fishing around grass, because this is sure as heck not a weedless application. Well, in my experience, fish love to chase a bait and react to it when the bait is ripped out of grass. So it actually kind of helps you to get your bait stuck or lodged just a little bit in that grass, then rip it or tug it out, and that's when a fish will react. Now also, you want to be fishing around healthy vegetation. I'm gonna show you two types of grass right now. This type of grass right here might look okay to you guys, but it is nowhere near the best that it could be. It's kind of brown. It of course has some greener sections, but it is not the healthiest grass. Fish can live in this, but they would much rather live in grass like this. This here is juicy, healthy, green, delicious coontail here in Minnesota. This is the two grasses side by side. And so by using lures like a lipless crankbait, sometimes your cast is gonna be messed up by the grass. You'll have to reel it in, strip the grass off, and make another cast, but it actually allows you to check your spot that you just graphed to find out if the grass is healthy. Because I'm just telling you guys, bass love healthy grass. They would much rather be in the healthy, oxygen-producing grass than the grass that is not healthy and not producing oxygen. So getting snagged in the grass sometimes is not actually a bad thing. Now, if the grass is deeper and or you already know based on previous fishing days or just local knowledge, if you know where in the grass the fish are gonna be, a kind of a general area, or you find a really good scattered area, you may not even need to throw a vibrating jig, a moving bait of some kind. You can throw a worm. And I'm not saying you can't catch them on other things than a worm. You can. I've caught them on a jig. I've caught them on any kind of slower moving baits. But a worm is my favorite. And I've got 4 main types that I throw for deeper offshore grass. Starting with a swimming worm, or what I call an all-purpose worm. This worm right here is the Strike King cutter worm, and I absolutely love this thing because you can fish it in so many different ways. On a Texas rig with a bullet weight, I can fish it really deep. I can fish it really shallow. I can hop it across the bottom. I can swim it through the water column because of that tail that has a nice kicking action. If you are in deep summertime, it's really stinking hot out there, you're fishing maybe some deeper grass that even I'm gonna talk about in this video, 10, 12, 15 plus feet, a giant big worm is gonna be your best option. This here is the Rage Anaconda worm, and it is a fantastic ribbon tail worm to fish around offshore grass. If you wanna see a video on how to fish big worms, a masterclass on the giant soft plastic worm, I made one that has, I think, like 90,000 views. I think a lot of people liked that video. I will leave it linked in the video description as well. So either a smaller worm, you know, your 6 to 8 inch, or your 8 inch plus, depending on the fish's mood and the depth you're in. Generally, smaller worm for shallower offshore grass, bigger worm for deeper. My third favorite worm for fishing offshore grass, and one that I actually catch a ton of fish here in the north on, is a drop shot, but generally a slightly larger drop shot that I'm throwing for like my finesse tactics. So usually my drop shot is a spinning rod only sort of deal, 15-pound braid to like a 10 or 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. This thing is straight 15-pound fluorocarbon. I'm throwing this around definitely some thicker grass clumps, and oftentimes the drop shot works great because if those fish are sitting just above the grass, a worm like these two actually sinks a little bit too far deep into the grass, and if the fish are a foot or two above the grass especially, when the weight sinks down into the grass, your worm is sitting above right in their face, giving them the old wiggle, and sometimes fish cannot resist this thing. Worms are the best way to, once you find fish and know where they are in an offshore grassy location, to dissect and catch the most fish possible. And so now that you know what kind of grass to look for and what type of lures to throw around that grass, I say we get back out on the water and show you guys a few fish catches from some offshore grass that we marked waypoints on. Let's get out there. Got him. Got him. Let's go. We caught one. Didn't I tell you? Hey, chill. Oh, uh-oh. I got a stinking marker waypoint. That is one thing you've always got to do when you're grass fishing. We're in a big open flat right now. It is so easy to lose track of where you are fishing. And so as soon as I caught that fish, or probably should have done it earlier, I marked a waypoint. That way I can keep my boat here and make the identical cast, because fish in grass, way more than any other type of offshore structure, more than wood, more than rock, they will school up. I guess maybe not more than ledges, but they will definitely school up, and marking a waypoint is sometimes the only way to really know exactly where you were. So hopefully we'll catch a few more. We'll see. Maybe not, because that's just how fishing goes. Why do you fish rock off the bank anyways? Well, I know one thing is true about bass, and that is this. They have to be close to or directly next to some kind of forage base. So whether it's crawfish, bluegill, baitfish, alewives, whatever the heck your bass are eating in your body of water, frogs, they have to be in close proximity to what they are eating, because if not, they're not going to survive. And when the water temperatures get to their extremes, extra cold, extra warm, offshore rock is a great place for forage bases to move to, especially crawfish. So that's the why. Let's talk about the depth. How deep should you be looking for offshore rock? Because it's a little bit different than brush piles and grass. Now, because rock for the most part is naturally occurring, unlike brush piles, and it doesn't need oxygen to grow, unlike grass, it can basically be in any water depth. But I believe the best offshore rock depth is going to be 10 to 30 feet. So now that we know what depth to focus on when looking offshore, let's talk about the topography of where the offshore rock is. And I've got 3 main recommendations for topographic areas to look for offshore rock, and that's going to be humps, points, and spines, which are kind of points. We'll talk about that. Let's cover humps first. Imagine a hill on land that is covered by water. That's really all that a hump is. Humps vary a ton in size, both in width and height, and definitely in shape. They are not all the same shape. If you've got a deeper water area that kind of slopes up to some sort of circular looking thing, that's most likely a hump. This here is a hump, and this is a hump, and this also is a hump. Now, if you look at a rocky mountain on land, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about for offshore rocky humps. You will often see that the ground level of a mountain range is more soil-based bottom composition, and as you work your way up the hill, you'll find more rocks and boulders, oftentimes reaching a peak with the biggest rocks at the top, or reaching a peak with no rocks at the top, just vegetation, and that is exactly what is happening with offshore humps. We're gonna cover this more when I crank the engine up and go to graphing, so stay tuned for that. The reason why I'm talking about humps as my #1 place is because I feel like that is the highest percentage chance you have of finding offshore bass on rock. A hump is usually out in the middle of the lake. If there is any kind of forage base out there, there's nowhere else for them to go. They are kind of stuck there, and so the bass have an easy place to feed, an easy place to live, and they don't want to roam in open water. Now, the next location is going to be points. And I know I sound like an absolute broken record here, but points hold bass, and especially ones with rock. Now, if you see a point on land that has rock on the land side of the point, you can make a pretty good wager that there's probably rock that continues under the water on that underwater point. Now, make sure that you are studying your topographic maps, because oftentimes a point on land will not continue into the water in the exact same way that you imagined it should. Sometimes those underwater points will stick off at odd angles that you would not expect from the direction the above water point is heading, like this example right here. This island has 2 points, but the point continuing underwater in the middle is definitely not as expected as the one to the east there. And the last main piece of topography that I'm gonna look for offshore rock is going to be a spine. Now, Tyler, what the heck's a spine? A spine is a very interesting topographic feature that honestly doesn't have a standard definition, but here's what a few different ones look like on the map. This one here separates 2 bowls on one lake. It's really just a ridge in the middle with deeper water on both sides, and yes, it has rock on the entire thing. This one here follows a point on land out into the water, but it's definitely going a lot further out than you would think by just looking at it with your eyes. And this one here, while being in the middle of nowhere, I really wouldn't classify as a hump because it is much too skinny. Spines are the perfect blend between a hump and a point, and sometimes have the best rock on them, especially if you have a very fast sloping spine. If you have really deep water to relatively shallow really quickly, that's going to be some awesome rock. Now, what kind of rock are we looking for on those 3 main locations? And to be honest, I don't really have a surefire answer, because it all depends on your body of water, your water clarity, and the type of rock you have. And as a matter of fact, the type of bass you're going for. Largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass all react to rock and live around it a little bit differently. And so I can't give you an answer saying it's gonna be boulders, it's gonna be shale rock, it's going to be limestone. But I can say a good start is boulders and bigger chunk rock. Now, how do you find that? Let's hop behind the steering wheel and show you exactly what offshore rock looks like on my sonar. Now we're gonna roll up to a hump here in a second, but I wanna show you guys first what my screen looks like. What you see here is side scan on the top, my mapping on the left, and traditional sonar on the right. Now the reason why I use this configuration is because on side scan, you'll have a hard time distinguishing sometimes between what fish are and what a fish-sized rock is, because the return looks kind of identical. It is a hard, white, circular-ish return. So I like to have 2D sonar here on the bottom right, just in case I run over a rock pile or a boulder, I can actually see if there's a fish on that area that I would have missed on side scan. But just like rock and brush piles, it's gonna be hard to actually see individual fish on offshore rock, so you're still gonna have to fish around to find where the majority of the fish are on that rock. So side scan range, right now I have it set to about 80 feet. And the reason for that is because I'm not trying to cover a whole bunch of water to just find individual giant clusters of boulders. If you're on a big, long, flat, a huge hump, and you want to find the best looking stuff and not really get super into detail, run your range on the side scan here to like 150 feet on each side. I know a lot of pro anglers do that, and that's how they find stuff so quickly. But you're not gonna see any fish for sure, and you're not gonna see any detail on those rocks at 150 feet. But for me, in the humps that I'm marking today, I don't need 150 feet because I can make 1 to 2 passes over at 80 feet, have a whole lot more detail, and really find in 1 to 2 passes the best looking stuff. So I keep mine set about 80 feet for most offshore rock. Let's go into the side view settings here and go to the color scheme. I have a certain affinity for the orange crawfish, but black emerald can work really great for rocks. So can inverse grayscale. If you're looking for really, really hard structure down there, that's a great one. I see Scott Martin a ton using the rusted steel color patterns. Let's go find ourselves a hump. Now, as we approach the hump, I'm gonna graph over the entire thing and then explain what we're looking at. So what I marked waypoints on, the good rock, the bad rock, the soft return, the hard return. But as you can see on the side scan here, we have a beautiful transition there from soft bottom on the south side to north as we got up to that hump. We went over kind of the south tip of the hump, and now we're going back down the other side, and that was some gorgeous rock. So I'm gonna graph over this thing a few times to get the best looking screenshots, and then I'll talk through with you guys what I marked waypoints on and what's worth fishing. Now, one thing to be aware of when fishing offshore rock is that a lot of times there can be so much stuff to mark. You find so much rock, you hardly find any differences in the rock, and so you might feel like going waypoint crazy and dropping waypoints all over the rock. But just like fishing up shallow, you are looking for differences in that bottom composition. So if you have a muddy area that transitions quickly to a rock, a sand, a gravel, there can be fish there, so mark a waypoint. If you see a bunch of boulders and then all of a sudden a bigger clump, mark a waypoint there. I'm not saying you can't catch fish on the standard looking stuff, but if you find unique things offshore rock-wise, that's gonna be most likely where your fish are. And as you can see, from 30 feet to 60 feet on the left side of the boat has significantly more rocks and structure than on the right side. So we're gonna focus mainly on the left when putting down waypoints. If I was to place down waypoints to fish at this location, I would put one here on the drop-off, and a triangle of waypoints here. Now you may be wondering, why would you put waypoints there and why did you choose those specific icons? Let's talk about that real quick. Now, as we graph down this ridge right here and mark a few more waypoints, I want to talk about the waypoints that I use to actually put on top of the rocks, because they're not all the same. They're not all the boulder emoji. If I mark a single large boulder, I'm going to use this icon. If I see a cluster of boulders on my sonar, I'm going to use this icon. And if I graph over a long section of rocky area, maybe a spine, maybe there's just no differentiation, I will use a bunch of these icons, oftentimes with one that starts the area and then a few that kind of line up the best looking rock in that section, so I can make the best parallel cast along that line of waypoints. And man, oh man, look at that stinking rock. Gee, one of those boulders is huge, look at that. And the reason that I take such care with putting my waypoints down on offshore rock is because I need my bait to be in the strike zone for as long as possible. And for most offshore rock situations, the rock is the strike zone. If your bait gets outside the rock, the fish are not gonna be there. You're not gonna get a bite. And let's say you have a line of rocks going this way, and you make a cast going this way over them, you're not being very efficient. You are not putting your bait in the strike zone for the longest time you can. And speaking of baits, let's talk about what baits are best for fishing offshore rock. Now, as with almost everything in bass fishing, there are exceptions, but I hardly ever use moving baits, at least as my first choice on offshore rock. I prefer, personally, to throw a bottom contact lure because I know it's kind of like target casting. I know what's down there. I know hopefully if my lure lands in that rock that it's going to be in the strike zone, and so I don't need to cover water to find those rocks. If the rock area that I'm fishing is absolutely massive and it doesn't really have any defining bouldery characteristics, I will pick up a moving bait, so a soft plastic swim bait like this one here on an Outcast Tackle jig head, or a deep diving crankbait, or an underspin. But for the most part, I'm targeting individual rocks, tiny clusters of boulders that hopefully hold 1 to 5 fish, and that's best for me with a slow moving bait. My two favorites for offshore rock being a football jig and a drop shot, which is currently broken. I gotta get a new weight. So the number one thing that I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna reiterate it again and again, you need your bait to be in the rocks for as long as possible. The rocks is where the strike zone is going to be. And so if your bait's not there, whether you know from experience in the body of water, or you see your bait fall or be worked out of those rock areas on your sonar, reel back in and make another cast, because oftentimes those fish, I'm not gonna say never, but oftentimes they're not going to be in or feeding around the outside of the rocks. They're gonna be on the rocks or the boulders themselves. And if you don't think you're in a productive area, reel in as quickly as you can and fire back out there. Well, now that we mentioned forward-facing sonar, what do rocks look like on LiveScope? Let's check it out. As you can hopefully see on the screen right here, there's a bunch of mounds on the bottom. That's kind of what rocks look like. They are a white, a harder return. Out there in 80 feet, I'll kind of screenshot right here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. There is a few boulders on the bottom and then one bigger one that has a fish, matter of fact, 2 fish on it. And as we continue the video, you'll see a few more boulders there and there that kind of mark the bottom in sort of a pebbly looking surface with a few fish above them. Keep it playing and boom. To the left there, just under the boat, is a few big boulders with what looks like a school of baitfish on top. That is so cool to see. Offshore rock really can hold an entire ecosystem during the extreme temperature months of the winter and the summer. Got one. There we go. Yes, sir. Let's go. Spot lock right here. As soon as it hit the rocks. Yes. Beautiful smallmouth bass. Right as the lighting changed. I apologize, folks. That thing's big. That thing's big. Oh my goodness gracious. Rock spine smallmouth bass on the football jig. Old crawfish eater, gotta love it, yes. And just like I reminded you guys a few minutes ago to be in the rocks, for the first few casts here, I don't think I was in the good productive rock. Then as soon as I made my first cast over the good stuff, I got that smallmouth. That right there is proof that you need to be in the juice. Let's get back at it. There's one. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh baby, on the drop shot. Oh, we got big head shakes. Woohoo! We're gonna bring them around and do the smallie scoop. Boom! Look at that! Smallie! Definitely not as big as the last one, but this one got the drop shot on a boulder. Who could have guessed? Not me. I'm just kidding. I guessed that just now. Now there's tons of different types of offshore wood. There is standing timber, there is cane piles, there is brush piles, there are laydowns. We're gonna discuss the two main ones for offshore fishing today, and that is going to be the brush pile and the laydown. So let's jump into talking about where to look for this offshore wood. The first place you're gonna wanna look for offshore wood, specifically brush piles, is going to be areas where human beings would put the brush piles out. So high percentage places that bass could be during the winter and the summer months. The first of those being the most obvious, a point. And so if somebody's going to cut down a tree and sink it with some cinder blocks to make a brush pile, spoiler alert, that's what most brush piles are made of, is man-made stuff. So they cut down trees, they bundle them together with wire or string and then sink them. That's what a man-made brush pile is. So points are the first place you're gonna look with your electronics to find offshore brush piles. The next place you're gonna wanna look for offshore wood is going to be humps. Humps, imagine them as kind of like underwater mounds that the ground comes up, and usually a semicircular shape, and those are great places for guys to put underwater brush piles. The next topographic feature to look around for offshore wood is going to be your breaks. A break can combine with a point or a hump, but it's just anywhere that goes from a flat, shallower area, a steep drop to a deeper area. So it could be a ledge on the Tennessee River, it could be a steep drop off on a rocky lake, it could just be a very quick break off of a hump or a point on a lake like we're on today with relatively soft bottom. And breaks are amazing places to find bass because oftentimes if the ground is going to slope that fast off, that is not a sand or a mud or silt bank. Usually if it's silt, it's going to have more of a sloping, kind of slower curve to it. If it is a sharp decrease in depth, that's usually a hard bottom like rock or clay that doesn't degrade over time. And the last place to look for wood is going to be a flat. Now flats are confusing because they're totally flat. There's hardly any contour line differences. There's nothing really to key in on. But what I love to do is find big, large, expansive flats and graph as fast as I can. And we're going to talk about that here in a second, to find brush piles without much clarity, just try to find where they are. And oftentimes, if you have a flat that kind of like leads into a bunch of docks relatively close to deep water, like you see right here, if it is legal in your state to have brush piles, those dock owners will most likely have put brush piles out in front of them. And if not the dock owners, if they don't fish, anglers have, because that combines a dock, which is great shallow cover, the bank line, the deep water, and kind of the transition area between. And oftentimes on a flat, you can find a few big bass chilling on offshore wood that you would have no clue was ever there without using your electronics. Now, the next question I want to answer is how to effectively and efficiently graph the points, the humps, the breaks, in order to find the most structure in the least amount of time possible. And so we're going to hop on the map real quick to show you guys exactly how I do it. When it comes to points, I'm usually graphing before the point starts on either side of it in a straight line, usually in about 10 to 20 feet of water. That way my side scan reaches deeper water and shallower water. And I'm gonna graph out to the tip of the point. Once I get to the end of that, I will mark any waypoints on stuff that I saw that I wanna maybe check out and fish. I will then do a loop in open water, and starting at the point, head back down the other bank line to finish out that point. That's my main effective way of finding structure quickly on a point. When it comes to humps, I usually take a 3 straight line approach. So I will go across the hump kind of on the side of it one way, then across the hump on the side of it the other way, and then across the hump on the side of it the third way, kind of creating a triangle per se. Most of the time, I'm not gonna find structure directly on the center top of that hump. It's gonna be kind of near the break line, and so using those 3 angles usually covers the entire hump for me. With drop-offs, breaks, ledges, whatever you wanna call it, I'm usually taking my boat and running a zigzag down that break. That way I'm getting a shallow angle and then a deep angle, and then a shallow angle and then a deep angle. That's the best way that I found to do that. And when graphing flats, you've really just got to put the pedal to the metal. I'm not talking get on plane with your boat, but the fastest you can go where your sonar is not impeded by the prop wash from the propeller on your engine or whatever the problems you have with your transducer at higher speeds, you want to go just below that and forget about quality, forget about seeing fish in the brush piles or offshore wood. You just want to see the stuff. You can mark a waypoint, come back, check it out with downscan, traditional sonar, or forward-facing sonar like live scope. That's what I tend to do. But if it's a flat area, you don't have time to waste. If you're in a tournament pre-fishing situation, or heck, you're just going out there with your buddies trying to catch some bass, ain't nobody got time to graph slowly on a flat. So now we know the why of deep wood. Bass love to use them as habitat and feeding areas. The where, the offshore structure, topographic map type stuff. Let's talk about what offshore wood looks like on your fish finder. So I like to have my side scan for brush piles anywhere from 70 to 100 feet out on each side of the boat. I think that gives me a good middle ground between having a whole bunch of distance to cover to just see anything and being able to have a little bit of clarity to really tell what I'm looking at. Usually within 70 feet is where my clarity gets best. 70 to 100 feet is kind of, I can see the stuff, but I can't exactly tell what it is. Now, before we hop on the water and show you some screenshots from my exact graph on this exact lake, I grabbed some photos from the internet of what certain types of wood look like on side scan and down scan. So this is what a classic brush pile looks like on side scan. And this is what a classic brush pile looks like on down scan. Now here's another one on side scan. As you can see, this pile is being driven directly over by the boat because the pile is split between the screens. The area from the white line in the middle to where you see the ground start, that's going to be your water column underneath the boat. Now here's what a brush pile looks like when you drive over it on side scan, down scan, and traditional 2D sonar. Some are gonna be big pieces of wood, some are gonna be small branches, some are gonna be a collection of Christmas trees all tied together. Some are gonna be put in buckets with concrete, that way the tree stands straight up. These examples you've been seeing on the screen are ultra clear examples, and honestly, it's gonna be rare for you to find a whole lot of these on your body of water every single time you go out. I guarantee you, everybody's lakes out there, if you got brush piles, you've got a few that are super clear, super defined, but the older a brush pile gets, the more guys fish it, the more weather and water degrade it, the smaller it gets and the less defined it is. So you may have to put a little bit extra time into finding those older brush piles because they're not usually gonna look like the ones I've been showing you on the screen. Now here's what a partially laid down tree looks like on side scan versus on down scan. This down scan tree is even hanging over a break, which makes it double trouble. And just to remind you what a fish can look like on side scan, here is an image of that. You can tell they are suspended since the shadow they cast from the sonar bouncing off of them is pretty far away from them. If they were close to the bottom, there wouldn't be as much of a shadow. These fish though are most likely not bass. They're most likely carp or gar because of the size of them and because of how high they are off the water column. Most of the time, I'm not seeing bass behave like that. Now, one misconception about graphing for offshore wood and brush piles is that you're gonna see the fish in those brush piles on your sonar. I hardly ever see fish that I catch on my traditional sonars, my side, my down, my 2D. I hardly ever see those in the brush pile. When I do see fish, I see them on forward-facing sonar. And so don't be discouraged if you're graphing and you're trying to zoom in on the brush pile that you saw and you're like, is that a branch or is that a fish? Because they're both hard returns. They're both wider returns on my graph. Oftentimes you're not gonna see at least all the fish. You might see one or two maybe hanging off to the side. If there's crappie in the brush pile, you're gonna see a handful of crappie down there. But if you're going for bass, most of the time you're not gonna see a whole lot of them in the brush pile. But in my experience, there's always fish in brush piles. It's just, do they wanna eat or not? And sometimes the answer is no. Now, when I'm fishing offshore wood, I mainly throw these 4 lures right here. And let me talk about why each one and in what order I throw them. So common bass fishing knowledge would say that if you arrive at a spot, whether it's shallow or deep, you wanna throw a reaction bait first to nab those fish that are in a reactionary mood, and then when that bite slows down, you throw more slower moving lures. But since brush piles are so sticky, they're so snaggy, I do not go with reaction baits like the suspending jerkbait or the sinking jerkbait, or the deep diving crankbait like a 5, 6, or 8 XD first. I'm gonna reach for my confidence lures and ones that I know are most often not gonna get stuck in the brush pile, and that is a giant worm on a shaky head and a football jig. I catch most of my bass in brush piles on these 2 baits right here, with almost all the rest of the fish that I catch on brush on the deep diving crankbait and the sinking jerkbait. And again, the reason why I choose slower weedless lures first is because I don't want to get stuck right away. Brush piles have a tendency to grab your lures, and so if you want the best chance at finding out if there's a fish in there and if he'll bite, you want to have the most casts in there possible within about a 10 to 15 minute period. If I don't get a bite within 15 minutes, I'm gone to try a new brush pile. But if you cast your 6XD in there and get snagged on the first cast, you've got to troll over there and yank your rod up and down and probably scare away any fish that was in a biting mood in that brush pile because you threw a non-weedless lure first. So my personal opinion, this is what works for me. I throw weedless big bass lures first, and then your treble hook, swim bait on a jig head, hair jig, drop shot to finish. If the fish are in a really weird mood, a drop shot can catch them, but I don't want to do that. I'm brush pile fishing. I want to catch them on big stuff. So the first day that I went fishing here on this lake was amazing. It was mid-May, the brush pile bite was just beginning, and this was the first brush pile that I found on my map and that I stopped on. On the side scan image, you can't really see a whole lot besides a few fish on that left side there in that hard return closer to the boat, but that's not what I was fishing. I was fishing on the right side. Now you might be looking at this and saying, Tyler, where the heck is the brush pile? Well, it is right there. This pile is an older one, a smaller one, but I can still tell it's there because of the shadow it casts right there. So what I did was press on the screen to mark a waypoint on that exact brush pile. I spun the boat back around, and one of my first casts with the football jig into that brush pile resulted in this. Gosh, there's one. There's one. Wow, I thought that was totally crappie. I thought that was totally crappie. It is not crappie. It's a huge bass. It's a giant bass. Oh, come on, come on. Oh no, gosh. Dang, yes sir. Let's stinking go. 7+ pounder at a baby. Oh, football jig, top of the mouth. Thank you, friend. So after that fish, I ended up staying around the brush pile for about another 20 minutes, only caught one more 2-pounder off camera on the big shaky head worm, and then I moved on to a second brush pile. That brush pile was in 8 to 10 feet of water, which is shallower than the one I had previously caught him in, and so I didn't really find many active fish. I could see fish, but they wouldn't bite, so I didn't waste any time. I spent 10 to 15 minutes there, and I headed out to find another one. Now the third brush pile I stopped in was another good one. Now so far, the first brush pile was on a flat next to some docks. The second brush pile was on a point. And the third brush pile, as you can see here from zooming out on the map, is on an underwater point. There is no land in sight that looks like a point that would extend into the water. This is an underwater point that I could only find using my electronics. And there was a few brush piles in a nice rock area on that underwater point, as you can see here. And my very first cast with the football jig down in that brush pile resulted in this. Gosh, there's one. There's one. Biggin, 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 yep, biggin. Biggin. Giant, 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 giant. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes! Woo! 8-pounder, baby! Let's go! That right there, folks, is what I'm talking about. It's a big one. Yes! Ho, ho, ho. Maybe not an 8. That one would go 7 again, though. Whew. And a few minutes after that one, in a brush pile off to the side, I caught one more on the jig. There's one. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Another biggin, maybe? Maybe, yes, it feels like it. It feels like it. Oh, no, not as big. He's just swimming at me. Let's go. Let's stinking go. Woohoo! Look at that beauty right there. Sorry the light's so highly exposed there. Got him on the football jig. Love it. So as you can see, on that day, the brush pile bite was just working extremely well. The fish were eating a football jig and they were eating it all over the lake. It's like they were all connected to each other's minds. We are hungry today and we're gonna eat this thing. But I'm guaranteeing you guys, it's not always like that.